Hello everybody, I'm Father David and I'm going to be reading a summary of the life of King David. As we listen, we can think about the people in the story. Have we heard about them before? What do we think they were like? There seems to be someone missing from the story. Who could that be? I'm going to be reading David, the shepherd from Bethlehem. David of Bethlehem became the second and the greatest king of Israel. He trusted God, and God was with him. And so the people of God cannot forget the name of David. In Israel, many stories were told about him. David was the youngest son of Jesse. He was guarding the sheep when Samuel came to anoint him king. David was a good shepherd. He knew his sheep and loved them and didn't run away when a wild animal came prowling round. David was brave. He had no fear of the enemies of God and his people. When he was still a youth, he went to visit his brothers in the battle camp. There he saw how a huge and powerful man, the giant Goliath, was mocking the Israelites and their God. None of the Israelites dared to do battle with Goliath, but David said to him, "You'll find out how strong the God of Israel is." David placed a stone in his sling, whirled it around above his head, and let it fly. It struck the giant Goliath in the middle of his forehead. At that the enemy took fright. They no longer wanted to fight against Israel. They ran away. David could sing and play the harp. In the book of Psalms, the hymn book of the people of God, there are 150 songs that David used to sing. For a time, David lived in King Saul's palace. Whenever Saul was sad, David would play on the harp. Then Saul would become happy again. David was able to defeat all their enemies because God was with him. So Saul made him a commander of his army. But because David won so many victories and was so popular with the people, Saul became jealous. He wanted to get rid of David. For many years, David and a group of his friends had to hide from Saul. When the Philistines went to war against Israel once more, Saul's army was unable to stand up against them. Saul's 3 sons died in the mountains of Gilboa. Saul himself was seriously wounded. Then he threw himself upon his own sword. So let's think about the story that we've just listened to. And you've probably got your own thoughts about it, which it would be good for you to discuss and to share. But it's a story about a family. So do you think that David's family was surprised when David was chosen to be king? Because he was the youngest, and people might have expected that it was his oldest brother who would be chosen as king. So it's a story about families and relationships within families. What's your place in your family? And the story mentioned Samuel. Do you remember Samuel, the boy who God spoke to in the night time when he was asleep in the sanctuary in Shiloh? And he had to go to Eli to ask who it was who was calling him. And then the story tells us that David was a shepherd. And the story says that he was a good shepherd. So who do we think of now as being the good shepherd? Do you know the parable of the good shepherd? Perhaps you could try to find it in the Gospels, one of Jesus' parables. But also at the end of John's Gospel, Jesus asks St. Peter to be the shepherd of his flock. So who are the shepherds of God's people today? Perhaps you might like to think about that. And then the person who was missing. Well, David's mother isn't mentioned at all, is she? I'm sure she had something to think about when he was chosen to be king and when he got himself into danger when he was fighting Goliath. And then God is mentioned from time to time, but not at the beginning of the story, because after all, it was God who had chosen Samuel and sent him to anoint David as his king. I expect you've got other things to think about as well. So listen to the story again. Think about what it means to you. And perhaps as a result of that, you might ask God to look after your family, to look after the people who are our shepherds today, and to give thanks to God for all the good things that are yours, the things that make you the sort of person that you are.